You fell down again, Grace. Eric's voice cuts through the chaos, loud and sharp. Incredibly so. His words seem to overshadow everything, even the blaring sirens of the ambulance. Grace, take my calls. What sort of wife do you have? His anger is almost palpable, but I can barely focus on it, not with everything that's happening around me. I'm on my way to the hospital. I try to keep my composure, but the words slip out, quiet and shaky. I might lose the baby. My heart races, panic bubbling up, but I refuse to let the tears fall. The paramedics work quickly around me, their faces grim but focused, as though they know exactly what's at stake. From the other end of the line, Eric snorts dismissively. You can't even make dinner, and now you're lounging in a hospital? We're starving here, Grace. Pull yourself together. His words, so far from any kind of sympathy, strike deep. I try to steady my breath, but my throat tightens with each passing second. A paramedic gives me a worried glance. Ma'am, you need to concentrate on maintaining composure. It's crucial for the infant. Her words are firm yet gentle, but all I can hear is the steady thrum of my own pulse in my ears. I squeeze my phone tighter, fighting the rising panic. I'm trying my hardest, Eric, I whisper, though I know it won't be enough to stop the storm brewing inside me. It has nothing to do with dinner, it's our kid, he responds with a deep sigh of frustration. You mean your best? Your best seems to be insufficient. Unable to listen any longer, I end the call. The physical strain isn't the only reason my heart thuds in my chest. The paramedic gives a subtle shake of his head. Soon we'll be in the hospital. Simply continue to breathe. As I lay there, like an old, scratched record, the memories of Eric's unrelenting criticism and lack of interest come flooding back to me. Every violent phrase reverberates more loudly in the ambulance's cramped, frigid inside. I'm wheeled into the maternity ward as soon as I get to the hospital. I get glimpses of diagnosis and worry as nurses move with practiced efficiency. Soon later, Dr. Collins, my OBGYN, shows up. Hang in there, Grace, she replies, calmly but firmly. We will do everything in our power to ensure the baby's and your well-being. A tear slides down my face as I nod. I'm grateful, Dr. Collins. Hours go by, punctuated by the soft buzz of hospital bustle and the beeping of monitors. In sharp contrast to the craziness of my home life, it feels unreal. I receive regular updates from Dr. Collins, whose serene manner serves as a lifeline amidst my own turmoil. The stress eventually subsides. She smiles reassuringly and says the baby is stable for the time being. However, tension must be avoided. It's very important. Knowing how unfeasible that request feels with Eric at home, I give a feeble nod. Doctor, I'll try. After Dr. Collins leaves, the only sound in the room is the gentle ticking of a nearby clock. I try to slow my racing thoughts as I stare at it and count the seconds. I have to figure out how to get out of this. The momentary silence is broken when my phone buzzes once more. Eric has sent you a message. Don't count on me to show up. Get yourself in order. Feeling a rush of something I haven't experienced in weeks, I throw the phone aside. Anger. What type of person would risk everything for their unborn child and not even be able to show up when their wife is in the hospital? There's a peculiar comfort in that simmering rage. Perhaps it's time for me to start considering my needs. What the infant requires, not exactly what Eric desires. This understanding is both liberating and terrible, and it comes to me like a wave. A nurse carrying a tray of food enters as the door creaks open. Grace, it's time to eat. You must use your strength. I nod as I glance at her. One thing is certain, but I'm not sure what I'll do next. I must strengthen myself, strong enough to defend my child and myself, able to handle any situation that arises, even if it involves confronting Eric. Letting the food's warmth penetrate into my bones, I take the first bite. Despite being a little step and a straightforward activity, it feels like the start of something more significant and essential. I concentrate on breathing and eating for now. We can put off the conflict until tomorrow. Above me, the fluorescent lights fluctuated, reflecting the ebb and flow of my inner feelings. I closed my eyes and leaned against the stark white hospital blankets, remembering a simpler time. I was one of my company's top marketing executives 2 years ago. The flurry of meetings, pitches, and late-night brainstorming was exactly what I thrived on. I met Eric for the first time on one of these busy days. He wasn't like this all the time. He was charming and considerate back then, making me laugh, surprising me with coffee on those long evenings, and giving me thoughtful presents. The recollection now seemed far away, almost like a dream. I was too preoccupied with my job to see the warning flags when our brief relationship turned into a hasty marriage. It became evident that my role would need to change when I became pregnant within a year. I was gently persuaded to become a stay-at-home wife by Eric. With his arm around my shoulder, he reassured me that it would just be till the baby arrived. I concurred, believing him while also having faith in us. However, the dynamic changed as the months went by. Eric's demands became unrelenting as his patience dwindled. With every day that went by, this once loving man became more aloof and judgmental. I called the nurse because I needed someone to interrupt my train of thought. "Could you just get me some water?" I was surprised at how weak my voice sounded. The nurse replied with a warm smile. "Of course, Mrs. Green." "Thanks," I whispered. Even though the gesture was simple, it reminded me of basic decency, which Eric's actions now frequently lacked. When she came back, the nurse set a cup on the side table. "Mrs. Green, try to get some sleep. It is not good for you both to be stressed." I gave a nod. "Call me Grace, please," she responded quietly. "All right, Grace," and left. In sharp contrast to what I had to deal with every day, her generosity was a salve. Eric's contemptuous demeanor wasn't limited to tense situations. His mother Cheryl's cold eyes stabbed me over a family meal a week earlier. "This casserole has too much salt, Grace. You ought to be more adept at taking care of the housework by now, don't you think?" "Mom's right, Grace," Eric said before I could reply. "You ought to be more adept at these things by now, if you're a stay-at-home mom." With a tight smile, I swallowed the retort that was burning in the back of my throat. "I'm trying my hardest, Cheryl." "Well," she shouted back, her eyes never leaving mine, "your best needs to improve." I questioned Eric why he never stood up for me that evening as I washed the dishes by myself. "Grace, they're my parents. I cannot simply quarrel with them about trivial matters. You must manage it more effectively, take better care of it." As I drank the water and considered how far I'd fallen from being that self-assured CEO to someone who now doubted her every action, his comments echoed in my head. A resolve, however, was emerging in this sterile hospital room. The nurse's unassuming generosity and Dr. Collins' remarks regarding stress made me think of a world outside of Eric's control. I could be strong again in that world, not just for myself, but also for my child. I was aware of what had to be done. It would be difficult to regain my strength and independence, but I had to stop crumbling, bending, and breaking for the sake of both myself and my child. My thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Dr. Collins had a clipboard in his hand. "Can we discuss, Grace?" Gently, she inquired. Steeling myself, I nodded. "Dr. Collins, of course. What should I know?" She started by saying, "It's about balancing your health and any external stress," and I could tell that this was the beginning of a discussion about regaining control. Eric and I had a difficult future ahead of us, but every second I spent in the hospital made me more determined. Maintaining health wasn't the only goal. One day at a time, it was about taking back my life. As I sat upright in my hospital bed, sifting through the flood of ideas in my head, sunlight poured in through the windows. My phone buzzed right before I took a sip of water. When Cheryl's name appeared on the screen, my heart began to race. "You've spent enough time in that hospital, Grace. You must return home and fulfill your responsibilities," she said without introducing herself. I tried to maintain my composure as I answered, "I'm not just lying here out of choice. For the sake of the baby's health, I must remain here." She sneered. "Excuse me. It's time for you to take charge because you are a useless wife to my son. When Eric gets home, we want dinner ready." I was shaking with rage when the line died. They were only thinking about food after I had just experienced a severe health scare? The hospital door suddenly sprang open and Eric rushed inside. "Why aren't you answering your mother's calls, Grace?" His face contorted in annoyance. I said, holding on to the bed bars for support, that I was resting. I should avoid stress, the doctor advised. Yerky was anxious. Grace, what about me? I'm the one who supports us by working all day. Do you believe I'm not employed? I retaliated, startling myself with how acerbic my voice was. I simply anticipate... Eric started to say something, but he stopped when Cheryl rushed into the room, her expression a mask of icy rage. Grace? Really? Using justifications to escape your obligations? She looked across to Eric. I never had these problems with your father. We brought you up to be disciplined, not lazy. I balled my fists up. I'm trying my hardest, Cheryl. Remember, I'm carrying your grandchild? Cheryl gave a snort. Being pregnant is not an excuse. Women have always done this without making a fuss. With no pity in his eyes, Eric gazed at me. Mom is correct. You must gather yourself. I had to deal with this unforgiving and frequently cruel familial dynamic on a regular basis. However, it felt different today. Something changed within me. These folks no longer had the authority they formerly had over me, despite all of their critiques and orders. You're right, I said firmly. I really need to get myself together. For this baby and myself. I indicated the sterile room, because this situation isn't functioning. Both Eric and Cheryl gazed at me in disbelief. With a tone full of contempt, Cheryl cautioned Grace not to make things more difficult for herself. More difficult for me? I gave a sour laugh. As it is, I'm barely making it through this. Cheryl looked at Eric. This is what you get for marrying such a weak person, Eric. Cheryl, that's enough. I didn't mean for the words to... I no longer cared, though. Both of you have made your points. Leave me alone now. Eric's gaze grew strained. Grace, don't push it. I looked him in the eye and didn't wince. Eric, you're not helping me sleep, so get out. At last, they left, abandoning me to the oppressive quiet of the chamber. For the first time, I released a breath I was unaware I was holding, as the door snapped shut. I was suddenly struck with the realization I couldn't keep doing this. This was not a living thing. I was aware that I needed a way out. My thoughts shifted to a better period of my life when I had caring friends and allies. There might, just might, be someone who could save me from this pit. It was time to connect, to unearth the strength I had long suppressed. In order to let in the morning light, the nurse moved the drapes. Adjusting the pillows behind me, I sat up. Despite the pain in my body, I was driven. I needed an escape route, and each second got me one step closer to asking for assistance. The door splintered open. I thought there would be another nurse, but Allie, a bolt from my past, showed up. She appeared more assured than ever and had shorter hair, yet there was no mistaking those sharp blue eyes. Grace? Her expression was a mix of astonishment and worry as she asked. I blinked as my emotions surged. What are you doing here, Allie? She approached, took a chair, and sat down by the bed. I noticed your name on the board while I was paying a visit to a business associate. Well, what took place? I inhaled deeply. It's a long story, really. Years of tension and, well, Eric, basically. She stopped smiling. Your hubby, Eric? Yes, I answered, hardly raising my voice above a whisper. It's been a nightmare. Despite my long-term efforts to make it work, I'm barely surviving his family, his emotional abuse. Leaning back in her chair, Allie evaluated me. The Grace I knew doesn't sound like that. I knew Grace to be a formidable force. Tears rolled into my eyes. I no longer feel like a dominant force. It's never too late to fix that, she added firmly. How bad is your health? I said. The baby is stable for now, but I need to avoid stress. And that's not easy, is it, Eric? She knew the answer before she asked. No, he isn't. Allie gave a contemplative nod. What if I told you, Grace, that you don't have to return to the past? You can start again with my aid. Her comments were a lifesaver. What are you saying? Downtown I have an apartment, Allie said. You can stay there for free and it's empty. A new beginning has begun. My thoughts were racing. Do you think it would be too much trouble? Absolutely not, Allie told me. You concentrate on the baby and your health. The rest is up to us. My thoughts was distracted by practical concerns, but the relief was overpowering. Eric would never let me leave without a fight. How about Eric? Allie's expression darkened. We'll take care of him. You must recover for the time being." She took her phone out and looked through her contacts. "A family law specialist is someone I know. Whatever you need to do next, he can assist you." I felt like I was wearing more armor with every word she said. I felt anything like hope for the first time in months. "Allie, why are you helping me?" "Grace, we've been through a lot," she said. "You have always supported me. It's my turn to assist you now, and seeing you like this bothers me." She was offering more than simply lodging. It was an opportunity to start over. "I'm grateful, Allie. I'm at a loss for words." Then she squeezed my hand and added, "Just say you'll take care of yourself, and you can call me if you need anything at all." I felt like I had a new purpose after talking to Allie. I reclined against the pillows while she went to make some phone calls. Although I couldn't alter the past, I might be able to influence a better future. Though I had a lot on my mind, one thing was obvious. I was no longer fighting this battle alone. With Allie by my side, I might just be able to take back my life and keep my child safe. I ended up in Allie's apartment in the heart of the city, a few days after I was released from the hospital. It was tiny, yet comfortable, a far cry from the chilly, tense atmosphere of my house with Eric. I sat down on the couch, experiencing a weird mix of worry and relief. Unpacking the items she had brought, Allie hurried about. "Grace, you must get some rest. Let me take care of this." "Thank you. Sincerely," I said. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'll be fine," she said, smiling reassuringly. "However, we must discuss the plan." Her tone was so serious that it accelerated my heartbeat. "What must we accomplish?" I was given a slip of paper by Allie. "I know a fantastic family lawyer, and here is his contact information. Mark Jensen is his name. He has a track record of managing difficult divorces." I felt the weight of the paper when I took it. This was an important move. "What time should I give him a call?" Allie's eyes were intense as she gazed at me. "The sooner the better. You won't get away with it easily from Eric. You require legal defense." I nodded, realizing how serious what she was saying was. "You're correct. Tomorrow I'll give him a call." As scheduled, I called the number on the paper the following day. After Mark's assistant responded, I was put in touch with the attorney. "Allie has briefed me on your situation, Grace," Mark remarked in a cool, collected tone. "You have choices, and I want you to realize that." Fear seeping into my voice, I muttered, "I don't want a drawn-out fight." "That makes sense," he said, "but we have to make sure you and your child are safe. Keep a record of every threat and aggressive conduct." The memories came rushing back, and I shivered. "I'll do that, all right. If required, we'll also apply for a restraining order," Mark added. "Additionally, I'll help you navigate the divorce procedure." "Grace, you're not alone." I had a glimmer of hope after I hung up. Perhaps, just possibly, things will improve. Weeks passed, and I gradually became accustomed to a new schedule. Hannah, Allie's daughter, dropped over with thoughtful presents for the infant on her many visits. I made the decision to tell Hannah about Eric one evening. I started cautiously. "Eric is not who you think he is." Hannah narrowed her eyes and scowled. "What are you saying?" I inhaled deeply. "He has abused his emotions, and his family. I can no longer live that way." Hannah's expression grew stern. "You know, I work with him, and he's not exactly nice there." However, I had no idea it was this awful. I nodded, sensing a connection growing. "I'm happy that you now know." Hannah's eyes glowed with resolve. "I can monitor him and inform you of any plans he may have." "Thank you." With a wave of appreciation, I said that would mean a lot. Hannah's reports regarding Eric eventually became an essential component of my plan. She mentioned his increasing annoyance at work, his contempt for coworkers, and the rumors that he would be demoted as a result of his actions. Every bit of knowledge I learned was a more brick in the wall I was erecting to keep myself safe. One day, Mark called me in the afternoon. "I've submitted the preliminary divorce paperwork, Grace. Soon Eric will be served. Anticipate his response." My heart was racing. What can I anticipate? He'll probably be upset. But keep in mind that you're taking this action for the future of both you and your child. Remain strong, Mark advised. Soon after, Allie came over and sat on the couch next to me. "You're supported no matter what occurs next. Together we are in this." I felt the truth in her words as I squeezed her hand. I was no longer the terrified lady in the hospital, but the fight was far from done. With everyone around me believing in me, I was stronger now. "We're going to be all right," I muttered as I held my expanding tummy. "We must be." I realized then that I had already taken the most important step in taking back my life. Despite the hard journey ahead, I was prepared to tackle it cautiously, with newfound allies by my side and an unwavering resolve. I was waiting for Dr. Collins at the hospital for my weekly visit when the door suddenly sprang open. With furious, irate eyes, Eric barged in. Since the divorce papers were served, he has not gotten in touch. Although I secretly knew better, I had hoped he would stay away. "Grace, what on earth do you think you are doing?" His face was inches from mine as he strode toward the examining chair and barked, "Do you really believe you can simply go and take my child with you?" My chest was thumping with my heart. "Calm down, please, Eric. It's a hospital. Relax." His voice reverberated across the tiny space as he yelled, "You're attempting to destroy my life." Dr. Collins walked in, his eyes wide before I could reply. "I'm sorry, sir, but you can't just walk right in here." Eric pointed his finger at her. "My wife and I are the only ones involved." I got up and turned to face him. "No, Eric, you must go. It's about me and my child." His face twisted in anger and his eyes narrowed. "You believe you can accomplish this? You believe that everything would be all right if you simply leave me?" The door abruptly opened once more. Glaring at Eric, Hannah intervened. "Eric, get out of here. Why in the world are you here?" With his fury directed at her, Eric spat. Hannah shielded Grace by crossing her arms. "I'll call the police if you don't leave now." Anger made Eric's face flush. "She is as misguided as you are. This was an error from the beginning." I answered in a trembling but forceful voice. "Get out, Eric. I have a lawyer on board. We are divorcing each other." After a moment of shock, he gave me a sour laugh. "Once this ideal of yours falls apart, you'll be back on your feet." With a dangerously low voice, Hannah took a step toward Eric. "Upday. Out. Right now." At last, Eric appeared to realize how terrible the situation was. His jaws were gritted in rage as he looked between us. "Grace, you'll regret this." I went back into the chair, trembling as he hurried out, slamming the door behind him. Hannah put a reassuring hand on my arm as she sat next to me. "Grace, you made the correct decision." With a worried expression on her face, Dr. Collins nodded. "Is it okay if I contact security? Ensure he doesn't return?" In an attempt to calm my breathing, I shook my head. "No, it's all right. For now, he's gone." Hannah gave me a sympathetic glance as she stared at me. "Are you okay?" I was able to nod. "I believe so." "Hannah, thank you. Remember, we're all in this together." Squeezing my hand, she said, "After completing the examination, Dr. Collins assured me that the infant was doing well. However, there was still tension in the air after the confrontation with Eric." Hannah turned to face me as we walked out of the hospital. "The time to be firm is now. Don't be intimidated by him." "I know," I responded, sounding more assured than I actually was. "I am unable to return, not right now." With a ferocious gleam in her eyes, Hannah grinned. "You won't either. We will ensure it." A fresh resolve descended upon me as we entered the vehicle. I wasn't surprised by Eric's response, but it did serve as a reminder of both how far I'd gone and how far I still had to go. Even if the path ahead was unclear, I wasn't traveling it alone. I had a glimmer of optimism with Hannah, Allie, and the help of my new friends. I had only just started the battle for my freedom, but I was getting stronger and more determined with each step. Knowing that I had the fortitude and backing to defend myself this time, I was prepared to face whatever lay ahead. A week had passed since Eric's tantrum at the hospital, and I was at last beginning to feel somewhat at ease in Allie's apartment. Before my phone buzzed with a call from Allie, my morning was calm. "Grace," she whispered urgently, "turn on the local news." Eric's face was displayed on the TV screen as I struggled for the remote control and turned it on. Eric Green, a local businessman, is accused of fostering a hostile work atmosphere and harassing employees. According to credible sources, a demotion is likely to occur soon. the reporter clarified. My heart pounded. What I was hearing was so unbelievable. However, I felt a wave of vindication. My thoughts were interrupted by Allie's voice. "Do you see that? He is receiving what is rightfully his." Still in disbelief, I said, "How did this happen?" Hannah collected and reported the evidence. Allie clarified that she knew the right individuals to ensure it wasn't ignored. Hannah came in the door with a triumphant expression on her face as I was hanging up. "Did you see the news?" "Yes, I did." My voice was full of passion as I said, "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me just yet. Eric isn't going down without a fight," Hannah said, her expression growing solemn. The TV was now muted as we sat on the couch. "At your building, I have made arrangements for additional protection. We can't be overly cautious until the restraining order is finalized," she continued. I shuddered at the idea of Eric attempting to strike back. "Are you certain he'll give it a shot?" Hannah gave a nod. "It wouldn't be surprising to me. You're not alone, though. We've got you covered." I inhaled deeply, aware of both the gravity of the circumstance and the power of my network of support. "I'm prepared for anything," Hannah frowned as she looked at her buzzing phone. "It's him. He has been making threats and calling." I took hold of her wrist. "What threats?" she said, looking at me with worried eyes. "He'll make sure you regret leaving him. Grace, he's desperate." I closed my eyes, my terror giving way to rage. "Give him a chance. I'm over my fear of him." The days that followed were tense. I could feel Eric's shadow lurking everywhere I went, but I resisted allowing it to rule me. Hannah and Allie stayed in touch and checked in often, providing unwavering support. Mark called one evening, his voice solemn. "Grace, we must speak." Eric's attorney contacted him. He will put up a fierce struggle during the divorce, particularly over custody. He would, of course. How do we proceed? We get ready and collect all proof of his mistreatment and threats. We make a strong argument for you, Mark suggested. I nodded, my resolve strengthened by the resolve in his voice. Whatever it takes, I'll do it. The weeks were a haze of planning and cautious living. Rumors about Eric's problems at work began to circulate as his demotion was formally announced. I was able to keep ahead of the game because, to Hannah's intelligence, the day for the divorce hearing finally arrived. My heart was racing as I stood outside the courthouse. Allie was a reassuring presence as she gripped my hand. "Grace, you've got this," she said. "Prove to them that you are a strong woman." Eric's glare pierced me as we entered the courtroom. His cocky manner was now tainted by desperation, and he appeared unkempt. I got to my feet, prepared to confront him. Although the hearings were difficult, Mark persisted in presenting all of the material that we had painstakingly gathered. The truth was indisputable despite Eric's attorney's attempts to portray me as unstable and incompetent. The judge ultimately decided in my favor. The difficult work environment, Eric's threats, and his violent behavior all worked against him too much. I felt as though a burden had been lifted as I left. Eric's loss was a win for my pregnant kid as much as for me. I had prevailed in my battle. Above all, though, I had taken back my life and was prepared to begin afresh. It seemed unreal the day I left the courthouse. I had prevailed in the battle. Nevertheless, the future appeared to be an uncharted region that stretched out in front of me. I was relieved and apprehensive as I made my way back to Allie's flat, which served as my makeshift haven. A few weeks later, I was formally a member of Allie's team, sitting in her office. I was appreciative of the opportunity to restore my life and the employment. Being surrounded by encouraging faces and being able to apply my skills again felt nice. Allie entered with a small blue onesie in her hand. She handed it to me and said, "For the little guy." As I ran my fingertips over the plush cloth, I grinned. "We appreciate everything you've done for us, Allie. Grace, you are family." She paused before continuing. "I want you to meet someone," in reference to family. She showed me a man in his mid-40s sitting in a conference room. As we walked in, he grinned broadly. "It's John here, Grace." "It's Grace here, John." John got up and held out his hand. "Grace, nice to meet you. I've heard a lot about you from Allie." I shook his hand and said, "Nice to meet you too," feeling a little intrigued. According to Allie, John works as a therapist. I reasoned that talking may be beneficial. I agreed, knowing her goal, but feeling a little overwhelmed. I'll think about it, Allie, thank you. I was both grateful and apprehensive as I made my way back to my flat that night. Is it possible for me to go past all of this? After several months, my life started to settle down. I worked hard, concentrating on both my new job and my pregnancy. Hannah remained close, and our connection turned into a ray of hope in an otherwise tumultuous existence. Allie summoned me to her office one afternoon. I have a proposal for you, Grace. What is it? Curious, I asked. I was given a folder by her, a chance to take the lead on a new initiative, something I believe you'll be really good at. I scanned the information after opening the folder. It was a difficult project, but it was also an opportunity for me to demonstrate my abilities once more. I'm at a loss for words. Yes, Allie said with a smile. This is something you deserve. All right, I responded with a rush of enthusiasm. Indeed. My phone buzzed as I walked out of her office. Hannah had texted me. Could we meet at the park? I have some news. She was seated on a bench, looking happy when I rushed over. What is going on? She smiled. Today, Eric lost his job. At last, they were fed up with his actions. I felt a lot of different feelings, but largely relief. Whoa, I am at a loss for words, Hannah chuckled. Grace, just take a breath. Karma is carrying out its duty. The remainder of the afternoon was devoted to laughter and conversation. A feeling of closure descended upon me. I was at last at peace, that night as I laid in bed and felt my baby's kicks. With Eric gone, a new chapter was starting in my life. We'll be all right, little one, I whispered. Months passed, and before long, the moment had arrived. Allie took me to the hospital right away when I went into labor late one night. Everything else vanished as soon as I held my son in my arms, even though the delivery was dramatic. With tears in her eyes, Allie murmured, You did it. I paused for a moment, the weight of our journey pressing heavily on my chest. No, we did it, I clarified. It was a simple truth, yet it felt like an incredible revelation. As I held my son close, I realized that I had arrived at this place, this moment, because of the darkest, most painful times in my life. But I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was truly living. Surrounded by people who loved me, who believed in me, I found myself not just coping, but thriving. In the days that followed, I took Allie's advice and saw John for therapy. It wasn't easy, but slowly I began to rebuild my confidence and understand the weight of everything I had gone through. The clarity that followed was liberating. When I returned to work, Allie formally offered me the role of project lead. At that moment, I knew I was ready. I accepted without hesitation, feeling like I could take on the world. It was as though I was stepping into a new chapter, one where the future was mine to shape, full of potential, full of promise. With a new circle of friends and allies by my side, I felt invincible. Having already conquered the hardest battles, I knew my son and I were ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, we were poised to face the future with strength, hope, and an unshakable bond. If you're inspired by stories of resilience and transformation, be sure to subscribe to the SoraBook channel. There are always more incredible journeys waiting in the next video, and you won't want to miss them.